The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her rifle scope for the 100th time that week. She had been the best marksman in her unit for 3 years running, but lately, something felt different. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy pack during a long march. Sarah had grown up in a small farming town where her father taught her to shoot rabbits that threatened their vegetable garden. Back then, every shot mattered because bullets cost money they didn't have. Now, 28 years old and serving in the elite Special Operations Division, every shot still mattered, but for entirely different reasons. General Marcus Thompson watched from the observation tower as his soldiers went through their morning drills. At 55, he had served his country for over 3 decades, climbing the ranks through various conflicts and peacekeeping missions. His gray hair was perfectly combed, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his reputation was spotless. Everyone respected General Thompson. He was known as a fair leader who cared about his troops and made decisions based on what was best for the mission and the safety of his soldiers. The training facility buzzed with activity as soldiers practiced everything from hand-to-hand combat to advanced weapons handling. Sarah's unit, Bravo Team, was considered the cream of the crop. They had successfully completed 12 high-risk missions over the past 2 years, and their success rate was unprecedented. The team consisted of 8 members, each specializing in different areas of combat and strategy. Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez served as the team's explosives expert. He could disarm a bomb in complete darkness or create one from everyday materials if the mission required it. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez handled communications and intelligence gathering. She spoke 4 languages fluently and could hack into enemy systems faster than most people could type their passwords. Corporal David Kim was their medic and also happened to be one of the finest hand-to-hand combatants in the entire military. The rest of the team included specialists in reconnaissance, tactical planning, and advanced technology. But Sarah was their ace in the hole. When they needed someone eliminated from a distance, or when precision shooting could make the difference between mission success and catastrophe, everyone looked to Captain Chun. General Thompson had personally selected each member of Bravo Team. He had watched their careers, studied their psychological profiles, and handpicked them for this elite unit. Sarah remembered the day he called her into his office 2 years ago. She had been nervous, thinking she was in trouble for something. Instead, the general offered her the opportunity of a lifetime. "Captain Chun," he had said, his voice warm but authoritative, "I've been watching your progress. Your shooting scores are remarkable, but, more importantly, you have the temperament for the kind of work we do in special operations. You stay calm under pressure, you think clearly in chaos, and you put the mission first while never forgetting that your teammates depend on you." Sarah had accepted immediately. The work was challenging but rewarding. Bravo Team was deployed on missions that regular military units couldn't handle. They rescued hostages from terrorist compounds, gathered intelligence in hostile territories, and eliminated high-value targets that posed threats to national security. Every mission was different, every challenge unique. The general had become more than just a commanding officer to the team. He was a mentor, a father figure to some, and someone they all trusted completely. He shared meals with them, listened to their concerns, and always made sure they had the best equipment and support available. When team members had family problems, the general would personally make sure they got leave time to handle their situations. When they were injured on missions, he visited them in the hospital. This morning's training exercise was different from their usual routine. General Thompson had announced that they would be practicing a new type of mission scenario. The details were classified, but he assured them it was important preparation for an upcoming assignment that could significantly impact national security. Sarah positioned herself at the designated shooting station, approximately 800 meters from her target. The wind was calm, the lighting was perfect, and her rifle was zeroed in exactly as she preferred. But something nagged at the back of her mind. The target setup seemed unusual. Instead of the standard military targets they typically used, these were more realistic, almost like mannequins dressed in civilian clothing. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached her position. "Sarah, have you noticed anything odd about today's exercise?" She lowered her rifle and looked at him. Jake was usually lighthearted, always ready with a joke or funny story to break tension. Today, his expression was serious, almost troubled. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she had been thinking the same thing. The targets, the scenario setup, even the briefing this morning. Something feels off. The general was different too. Usually, he explains everything in detail, but today he was vague about the mission parameters. Sarah had noticed the same thing. During the morning briefing, General Thompson had been less talkative than usual. He provided the basic information they needed for the training exercise, but avoided answering specific questions about the tactical objectives or the real-world application of what they were practicing. Sergeant Gonzalez joined their conversation. I've been monitoring communications all morning, and there's unusual chatter from the command center. They're discussing something called Operation Silent Thunder, but it's not in any of our mission databases. The three soldiers exchanged glances. In their 2 years as a team, they had never encountered a situation where they felt uncertain about their orders or their commanding officer's intentions. The general had always been transparent with them, explaining not just what they needed to do, but why they were doing it and how it fit into the bigger picture. Maybe we're overthinking this, Sarah suggested, though she didn't really believe it herself. The general has never steered us wrong. If he says this training is important, then it's important. But even as she spoke those words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally different about today. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years. In their line of work, intuition often meant the difference between coming home safe and not coming home at all. The training exercise continued throughout the morning. Bravo team practiced various scenarios involving precision shooting, tactical movement, and coordination under pressure. Sarah's shooting was flawless as always. Every target she engaged was eliminated with a single shot, exactly where she intended to place it. General Thompson observed from multiple vantage points, taking notes and occasionally speaking into his radio. His behavior seemed more intense than usual, more focused on specific details of their performance rather than their overall teamwork and mission success. During their lunch break, the team gathered in their usual spot under a large oak tree at the edge of the training area. It was a tradition they had started during their first week together. No matter where they were training or what they were doing, they always found time to eat together and discuss anything that was on their minds. Corporal Kim was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Does anyone else feel like we're being tested for something specific today? Like the general is evaluating us for a particular mission rather than just maintaining our general readiness? Sergeant Gonzalez nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. And there's something else. I picked up some communications traffic that suggests VIPs will be visiting the base tomorrow. High-level government officials, but the details are classified above our clearance level. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. In her experience, when high-ranking government officials visited military facilities, it usually meant one of two things. Either they were planning something big, or something big had already gone wrong, and they needed to assess the situation personally. Whatever it is, Lieutenant Rodriguez said, we stick together. We've been through too much as a team to start doubting each other or our chain of command now. The afternoon training session focused on urban warfare scenarios. The team practiced clearing buildings, protecting VIPs during transport, and responding to various threat situations. Sarah noticed that many of the scenarios involved protecting government officials or eliminating threats to high-value targets. As the day progressed, her unease grew stronger. The targets they were practicing against, the scenarios they were running, and the specific skills the general seemed most interested in observing all pointed toward a mission unlike anything they had done before. That evening, Sarah remained on the training range after the rest of her team had gone to dinner. She wanted to practice a few more shots and clear her head. The range was quiet except for the distant sounds of evening activities around the base. General Thompson appeared beside her shooting position just as she was preparing to pack up her equipment. Excellent shooting today, Captain, he said, his voice carrying its usual warmth. Your accuracy is improving, and your speed is remarkable. Thank you, sir. I've been working on my breathing techniques and trying to eliminate any unnecessary movement in my shooting stance. The general nodded approvingly. I wanted to speak with you privately about tomorrow. We'll be conducting a special exercise, and I need to know that I can count on you completely. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm evening air. Of course, sir. You can always count on me. Good. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Tomorrow, We'll be testing our security protocols with a simulated assassination attempt. Government officials will be visiting, and we need to ensure our response procedures are flawless. The general's explanation made sense, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. Sarah had participated in security exercises before, but they were usually announced well in advance and involved multiple units working together. Will the entire team be participating in this exercise, sir? Yes, but each of you will have specific roles. Your job will be to provide overwatch from an elevated position. If the simulated assassin reaches a certain point in their attempt, you'll need to take the shot to end the exercise. Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing. Security exercises typically used paintball guns or laser tag equipment. The general hadn't mentioned anything about using simulated ammunition or modified weapons. Sir, what type of ammunition will we be using for this exercise? The general's expression became more serious. Live rounds, Captain. We need this to be as realistic as possible. The government officials understand the risks, but they want to test our capabilities under the most authentic conditions possible. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Using live ammunition in an exercise with government officials present was highly irregular and extremely dangerous. Safety protocols for such situations required extensive planning, multiple safety officers, and approval from the highest levels of command. Sir, I want to make sure I understand correctly. You're asking me to use live ammunition in a training exercise with real government officials present. That's correct, Captain. I know it sounds unusual, but these are unusual times. The threats our leaders face are becoming more sophisticated, and we need to ensure our protective capabilities are at the highest possible level. The general placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder in what seemed like a fatherly gesture. I chose you for this responsibility because you're the best marksman I've ever worked with, and because I trust your judgment completely. If anyone can handle this level of responsibility, it's you. After the general left, Sarah remained on the range for another hour, thinking through everything he had told her. The explanation made logical sense, but her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She had never heard of a security exercise using live ammunition with actual government officials present. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come as she replayed the day's events over and over in her mind. The unusual training scenarios, the secretive atmosphere surrounding tomorrow's exercise, and the general's request that she use live ammunition all combined to create a picture that didn't quite fit together properly. She thought about her teammates and how they had all noticed something different about the general's behavior. She thought about the communications traffic Sergeant Gonzalez had intercepted. Most importantly, she thought about the trust she had placed in General Thompson over the past 2 years and whether that trust was still warranted. As the night wore on, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow, she would follow her orders as she always had, but she would also trust her instincts. If something seemed wrong during the exercise, she would be ready to act accordingly. The safety of innocent people and the integrity of her unit were more important than blind obedience to orders that didn't feel right. The last thing Sarah remembered before finally falling asleep was the weight of her rifle in her hands and the knowledge that tomorrow, everything might change forever. The morning of the special exercise arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the base. Sarah woke before dawn, as was her habit, but today felt different from any other day in her military career. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl with anticipation and dread. She made her way to the mess hall early, hoping to grab some coffee and collect her thoughts before the day began. To her surprise, she found Lieutenant Rodriguez already there, sitting alone at their usual table with 2 cups of coffee growing cold in front of him. Couldn't sleep either? Sarah asked as she sat down across from him. Jake shook his head. Something's not right, Sarah. I've been thinking about yesterday all night, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. This isn't a normal training exercise. Sarah picked up one of the coffee cups and took a sip, grateful for the warmth. What do you mean? I've been in the military for 8 years, and I've participated in dozens of security exercises. They always follow the same basic protocols. Multiple units involved, extensive safety briefings, weeks of advanced planning, and always simulated ammunition or non-lethal alternatives. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the mess hall. I did some checking last night. There's no record of any approved security exercise for today. No paperwork, no authorization from higher command, nothing in the official training schedule. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing Jake confirm her fears made the situation feel much more real and dangerous. Are you sure about that? Positive. Maria helped me check multiple databases and communication channels. Whatever we're doing today, it's not an officially sanctioned exercise. Before Sarah could respond, Sergeant Gonzalez entered the mess hall, followed by the rest of Bravo team. Their faces all carried the same expression of concern and confusion that Sarah felt in her own chest. Morning briefing in 15 minutes, Corporal Kim announced as he sat down with his breakfast tray. The general wants everyone in full combat gear. The team ate quickly and mostly in silence. Each member seemed lost in their own thoughts, trying to piece together what was really happening and what they should do about it. Sarah noticed that everyone kept glancing at each other, silently communicating their shared unease. The briefing room was smaller than usual, and only Bravo team was present. Normally, training exercises involved multiple units and support personnel. Today, it was just the 8 of them and General Thompson. The general entered the room carrying a folder marked with classification symbols Sarah had never seen before. His usual warm demeanor was replaced by a cold, businesslike attitude that immediately put everyone on edge. "Good morning," he said curtly, without his typical friendly greeting or casual conversation. "Today's exercise is classified at the highest levels. What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room under any circumstances." He opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Sarah's blood ran cold when she saw what they depicted. The photos showed government officials she recognized from news broadcasts and political coverage. But these weren't official portraits or public appearance photos. These looked like surveillance images, taken from a distance with telephoto lenses. "Your targets for today's exercise," the general announced, placing the photos on the table where everyone could see them. Sarah felt her world tilt sideways. Targets? These were real people, real government officials. This wasn't an exercise at all. Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up first. "Sir, with all due respect, could you clarify what you mean by targets? Are we providing security for these officials, or are we practicing scenarios involving threats to them?" The general's expression hardened. "You are soldiers. Your job is to follow orders, not question them. These individuals have been identified as threats to national security. They are corrupt officials who are selling out our country to foreign interests." Sergeant Gonzalez leaned forward. "Sir, what evidence do we have of these allegations? And what authority do we have to take action against American government officials?" "The evidence is classified above your clearance level," the general replied sharply. "As for authority, sometimes soldiers must act when the normal channels of justice have been compromised." Sarah's mind was racing. Everything the general was saying contradicted everything she had been taught about military law, proper channels of command, and the constitutional principles that governed their service. American soldiers did not assassinate American government officials, regardless of any allegations of corruption. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "I need to understand exactly what you're asking us to do. Are you ordering us to eliminate American citizens?" The general stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a threat that she had never heard from him before. "Captain Chun, these people are traitors. They are actively working to undermine our nation's security and selling classified information to our enemies. The justice system has been compromised, and normal legal processes cannot touch them because they have too much influence and power." He walked around the table, stopping behind each team member as he continued speaking. "You have a choice to make today. You can be patriots who save your country from these traitors, or you can be accomplices to treason. There is no middle ground." The room fell silent as the implications of the general's words sank in. Sarah looked around at her teammates and saw the same shock and horror reflected in their faces that she felt in her own heart. Corporal Kim was the first to stand up. "Sir, I cannot and will not participate in the assassination of American government officials. This is illegal, unconstitutional, and against everything we swore an oath to defend." The general's hand moved to his sidearm. "Sit down, Corporal. That's an order." David remained standing. "No, sir. Some orders cannot be followed. My oath is to the Constitution, not to any individual commander. In one swift motion, the general drew his pistol and fired. The sound was deafening in the small briefing room. Corporal Kim crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across his chest. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The reality of what had just happened was too enormous to process immediately. Then, Sergeant Gonzalez screamed and rushed to David's side, pressing her hands against his wound and calling for medical assistance. "There will be no medical assistance," the general said coldly, his weapon still drawn. "And there will be no more discussion. You will complete this mission, or you will share his fate." Sarah's training kicked in despite the shock and horror. She was calculating distances, angles, and possibilities for disarming the general or creating an opportunity for escape. But they were in a closed room with limited exits, and he had the advantage of an already drawn weapon. Lieutenant Rodriguez slowly raised his hands. "Okay, General, you have our attention, but I need to know more details about the mission before I can properly plan our approach." Sarah realized that Jake was buying time, trying to get more information while looking for an opportunity to turn the situation around. She followed his lead. "Sir, you mentioned that these officials would be visiting the base today. What's their itinerary? How many security personnel will be with them? What's our timeline?" The general seemed pleased by their apparent cooperation. He holstered his weapon but kept his hand resting on it as a clear reminder of what would happen if anyone else refused to follow orders. "The delegation will arrive at 1,400 hours. They'll be touring the Advanced Weapons Training Facility and observing a demonstration of our new sniper capabilities. Captain Chun, you'll be positioned in the tower overlooking the main courtyard. When I give you the signal, you'll eliminate the 3 primary targets." He placed additional photos on the table, showing detailed layout plans of the base and marking specific positions for each team member. Sarah studied the plans while fighting to keep her expression neutral. The setup was sophisticated and had clearly been planned for weeks or months. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you'll handle communications jamming to prevent any calls for outside assistance. Sergeant Gonzalez will monitor base security frequencies and alert us to any unexpected responses. The rest of you will be positioned to control access points and ensure no witnesses escape." The scope of the general's betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a misguided attempt at vigilante justice. This was a carefully planned coup attempt, using Bravo Team as his personal assassination squad. Sarah forced herself to nod and ask tactical questions. "Sir, what's our extraction plan after the mission is completed? How do we explain the deaths of government officials on a military base?" "Leave that to me," the general replied. "I have allies in high places who will ensure that this is presented as a terrorist attack by foreign agents. You'll be heroes who tried to prevent the assassination, but arrived too late." The plan was diabolical in its completeness. The general had thought through every angle, every potential complication. He had positioned himself to emerge as a hero while eliminating his political enemies and using Bravo Team as expendable tools. As the briefing continued, Sarah exchanged subtle glances with her surviving teammates. They were all thinking the same thing. They had to stop this, but they had to be smart about it. The general held all the advantages right now, but that could change if they were clever and patient. The briefing ended with specific timing instructions and code words for coordination. Each team member was given their equipment loadout and assigned to prepare for deployment. Corporal Kim's body was covered with a tarp and left in the briefing room as a reminder of what happened to those who refused orders. As they prepared their gear, Sarah found opportunities for brief, whispered conversations with her teammates. The consensus was clear. They would appear to go along with the plan while looking for opportunities to sabotage it and expose the general's treachery. Lieutenant Rodriguez had an idea for disabling the communications jamming equipment in a way that would appear to be a technical malfunction. Sergeant Gonzalez believed she could send warning messages to base security if she could access the right communication channels without being detected. But the biggest responsibility would fall on Sarah. She would be in the sniper position, and ultimately, she would be the one expected to pull the trigger. The general would be watching her closely, and any hesitation or refusal would result in immediate consequences for both her and her teammates. As they moved to their assigned positions, Sarah felt the weight of her rifle differently than she ever had before. This weapon, which had always been a tool for protecting innocent lives and serving her country, was now being used to threaten everything she believed in. The government delegation arrived precisely on schedule. Sarah watched through her scope as 3 black SUVs entered the base and proceeded to the main courtyard. She could see the officials clearly: Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams, Senator Robert Chun, and Congressman Michael Torres. All 3 were people she had seen on television and in newspapers, dedicated public servants with long records of service to their country. Through her earpiece, she heard the general's voice providing updates on the delegation's movements. They were touring the facilities as planned, getting closer to the courtyard where Sarah was positioned. In 30 minutes, they would be in her crosshairs, and the general would give her the order to fire. Sarah adjusted her scope and checked her rifle's readiness while her mind raced through possibilities. She had one shot at stopping this conspiracy, but failure would mean the deaths of innocent people and the success of a treasonous plot that would undermine the very foundations of American democracy. Looking down at the courtyard, Sarah saw General Thompson walking alongside the government officials, playing his role as a loyal military commander while planning their murders. The sight filled her with a rage that she had to fight to control. She keyed her radio with the agreed-upon signal to let her team know she was ready. Whatever happened in the next 30 minutes would determine not just the fate of 3 government officials, but the soul of everything they had sworn to protect. The minutes crawled by like hours as Sarah maintained her position in the observation tower. Through her scope, she could see the government delegation moving closer to the predetermined location where General Thompson expected her to begin the assassination. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her hands remained steady on her rifle. Secretary Williams was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a warm smile. She was known for her work on military healthcare reform and had personally visited wounded soldiers in hospitals around the world. Senator Chun, despite sharing Sarah's last name, was no relation to her, but she knew his reputation as an advocate for veterans' rights and military family support. Congressman Torres had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before entering politics and was respected by soldiers across all branches of service. These were not traitors or enemies of the state. They were public servants who had dedicated their lives to making the country better for people like Sarah and her family. The general's accusations were lies, and she knew it with absolute certainty. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice providing tactical updates. But embedded in his standard military communications were subtle code words they had developed during their years working together. He was telling her that he had successfully disabled the communications jamming equipment without making it obvious to the general. A moment later, Sergeant Gonzalez's voice came through with her own coded message. She had managed to send an encrypted warning to the FBI field office in the nearest city, alerting them to a potential threat against government officials at the military base. Help was coming, but it would take at least 45 minutes for federal agents to arrive. Sarah felt a mix of relief and terror. Her teammates were doing everything they could to sabotage the general's plan, but they were still walking a tightrope. If the general suspected their deception before help arrived, he would kill them all and find another way to complete his mission. The delegation had reached the main courtyard and was being escorted toward the weapons demonstration area. Sarah could see General Thompson pointing out various features of the base while maintaining his facade of loyal service. His performance was flawless, and if she hadn't known what he was planning, she would never have suspected anything was wrong. Through her scope, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were additional people positioned around the courtyard that she hadn't seen during the briefing. Men in civilian clothes who were clearly armed and watching the government officials with predatory focus. The general had backup shooters in place. Even if Sarah refused to take the shots, the assassination would still happen. The general had planned for the possibility that Bravo team might not cooperate, and he had contingencies ready to ensure mission success. Sarah keyed her radio with the emergency code that alerted her teammates to the presence of additional threats. One by one, they acknowledged her warning and began subtly repositioning themselves to have better fields of fire on the backup shooters. The situation was spiraling toward chaos. In a few minutes, the general would give the order to fire, and whether Sarah pulled her trigger or not. Innocent people were going to die unless she could find a way to stop it. As Sarah watched the delegation through her scope, she noticed that Secretary Williams was wearing a small pin on her lapel that caught the sunlight. It was a military service pin, indicating that she had family members who served in the armed forces. Sarah remembered reading that the secretary's son was currently deployed overseas with the Marine Corps. The personal connection hit Sarah like a physical blow. This woman was not just a government official. She was a military mother, someone who understood the sacrifices that families like Sarah's made for their country. The idea of killing her in the name of patriotism was obscene beyond words. General Thompson's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. All units, prepare for execution. 30 seconds to target opportunity. Sarah felt time slowing down around her. Everything she had been trained for, everything she believed in, and everything she valued was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. She had seconds to make a decision that would determine the fate of multiple lives and possibly the future of American democracy. She adjusted her scope, but instead of focusing on the government officials, she began tracking the general's movement through the courtyard. If she was going to fire her weapon today, it would not be to commit treason. It would be to stop it. 20 seconds, the general announced. Sarah could see him clearly now, walking slightly ahead of the delegation and positioning himself for the best view of the assassination. His right hand was resting on his sidearm, ready to draw and fire if any of the government officials tried to run when the shooting started. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came through the earpiece with what sounded like a routine tactical update, but Sarah caught the hidden meaning. The backup shooters were in position, but her teammates had identified their locations and were ready to engage them if necessary. 10 seconds to execution, General Thompson announced. Sarah made her choice. Instead of waiting for the general's final command, she shifted her aim and fired. The shot was perfect, just as every shot she had ever taken in service to her country had been perfect. The bullet struck General Thompson in the right shoulder, spinning him around and sending his sidearm flying across the courtyard. Chaos erupted immediately. The government officials dropped to the ground as their security details rushed to cover them. The general's backup shooters began reaching for their weapons, but they found themselves targeted by the rest of Bravo team, who had anticipated this moment and were ready for it. All stations, this is Bravo leader, Sarah announced over the radio, using Lieutenant Rodriguez's call sign. We have a rogue officer attempting to assassinate government officials. Repeat, General Thompson is attempting to assassinate Secretary Williams, Senator Chun, and Congressman Torres. All units converge on the main courtyard immediately. The base's security forces, who had been kept in the dark about the general's real plans, responded exactly as they should have. Within minutes, the courtyard was swarming with military police and base security personnel. General Thompson, wounded but still conscious, tried to maintain his cover story. I've been shot by a terrorist sniper, he shouted. Protect the delegation and find the shooter. But his deception was falling apart quickly. The backup shooters he had positioned around the courtyard were being detained by base security, and their weapons and equipment told a very different story than the general's claims of a terrorist attack. Sarah remained in her sniper position, her rifle trained on the general in case he tried to complete his mission despite being wounded. Through her scope, she watched as military police approached him with drawn weapons instead of medical assistance. Lieutenant Rodriguez had reached the courtyard and was speaking rapidly with the security team leader, providing details about the conspiracy and identifying the locations of all the backup shooters. Sergeant Gonzalez was coordinating with the government officials' security details to ensure they were safely evacuated to a secure location. The general's face went through a series of expressions as he realized his carefully planned operation was collapsing around him. First confusion, then anger, and finally, a cold hatred as he looked up towards Sarah's position in the tower. You have no idea what you've done, he shouted toward her. Those people are destroying our country from within. I was trying to save America. Sarah felt no sympathy for the man who had betrayed everything they had sworn to protect. The general had murdered Corporal Kim in cold blood and tried to use the rest of Bravo team as tools for his treasonous plot. Whatever misguided patriotism had driven him to this point, it had transformed him into the very thing he claimed to be fighting against. Federal agents began arriving on the scene just as the base security forces finished securing the area. Sarah was ordered to remain in position until FBI personnel could reach her location and take her statement. She had become the key witness in what was clearly going to be one of the most significant military justice cases in decades. As she waited for the federal agents, Sarah thought about Corporal Kim and the sacrifice he had made by refusing the general's illegal orders. David had died protecting the Constitution and the principles they had all sworn to defend. His courage in that briefing room had bought them the time and motivation they needed to stop the assassination plot. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear radio traffic as the investigation began. Additional conspirators were being arrested across the base, including several officers who had been working with the general to plan and execute the operation. The scope of the betrayal was even larger than she had initially realized. The backup shooters, when questioned, revealed that they were not military personnel at all but private contractors hired by the general through intermediaries. They had been told they were participating in a classified counterterrorism exercise and had no idea they were part of an assassination plot against American government officials. Secretary Williams, Senator Chun, and Congressman Torres were all unharmed and were being evacuated to a secure facility for debriefing. But Sarah knew that the psychological impact of this betrayal would extend far beyond the immediate participants. Trust between the military and civilian leadership was fundamental to American democracy, and that trust had been violated in the most serious way possible. FBI agent Rebecca Foster was the first federal investigator to reach Sarah's position in the tower. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. Captain Chun, I'm Agent Foster with the FBI's National Security Division. Before we begin your formal statement, I want you to know that based on preliminary evidence, it appears you and your team prevented a catastrophic attack on our government. Your actions today may have saved not just 3 lives, but the stability of our entire democratic system. Sarah lowered her rifle and engaged the safety, officially ending her role as a sniper in this operation. Agent Foster, there's something you need to know immediately. General Thompson murdered one of my teammates, Corporal David Kim, during this morning's briefing when David refused to participate in the assassination plot. His body is still in briefing room C. The agent's expression hardened. We'll secure that scene immediately and ensure Corporal Kim receives the honors he deserves. What can you tell me about the general's motivation for this attack? Sarah provided a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the unusual training exercises of the previous day through the morning briefing and the final confrontation in the courtyard. Agent Foster took extensive notes and asked clarifying questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of military protocols and legal procedures. Captain, based on your observations and the general's statements during the briefing, do you believe he was working alone or as part of a larger conspiracy? Sarah considered the question carefully. Agent Foster, the level of planning and coordination required for this operation suggests he had significant help. He knew exactly when the government delegation would be arriving, their planned route through the base, and their security protocols. That information would have required access to classified scheduling and security details that are normally restricted to very high levels of command. As the interview continued, Sarah learned more about the investigation that was already underway. The FBI had been tracking suspicious communications related to potential threats against government officials, and Sergeant Gonzalez's encrypted warning had helped them connect those communications to the activities at the military base. The general's financial records were being examined, and preliminary findings suggested he had received significant payments from unknown sources over the past 6 months. His personal communications were being analyzed for evidence of coordination with other conspirators, and his access to classified information was being reviewed to determine how much sensitive data might have been compromised. Agent Foster concluded the interview by explaining what would happen next. Captain Chun, you and your surviving teammates will be placed in protective custody while this investigation continues. There may be other conspirators who view you as a threat to their plans, and we need to ensure your safety while we work to identify and arrest all parties involved in this plot. Sarah nodded, understanding the necessity of the precaution but feeling frustrated by the idea of being confined while questions about the conspiracy remained unanswered. She wanted to be actively involved in hunting down anyone else who had been part of the general's treasonous plot. Agent Foster, what about Corporal Kim's family? They need to be notified about what happened, and they deserve to know that he died as a hero defending the Constitution. We'll handle the notification personally and ensure they understand the circumstances of his sacrifice. Corporal Kim will be posthumously awarded the highest honors available for his courage in refusing illegal orders. As Sarah was escorted from the tower, she took one last look at the courtyard where so much had happened. The general was being loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his future stretching toward a military prison cell and probably a death sentence for treason. The government officials had been successfully evacuated, American democracy had been preserved, and the Constitution they had all sworn to protect remained intact. But the cost had been high, paid in blood, and betrayal by people who had trusted each other with their lives. Sarah knew that the investigation was just beginning, and the full extent of the conspiracy would take months or even years to uncover. But today, when it mattered most, Bravo team had chosen loyalty to their country over loyalty to a commanding officer who had lost his way. 3 months after the assassination attempt, Sarah sat in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., preparing to testify before a closed session of the House Intelligence Committee. The investigation into General Thompson's conspiracy had uncovered a web of corruption and betrayal that reached much higher into the government and military hierarchy than anyone had initially suspected. The room was windowless and sterile, with plain white walls and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. Sarah wore her dress uniform with full decorations, including the Medal of Honor she had received for preventing the assassination and exposing the conspiracy. But the weight of the medal on her chest felt heavier than the rifle she had carried for so many years. Lieutenant Rodriguez sat beside her, also in dress uniform, and also wearing newly awarded decorations for his role in stopping the plot. Sergeant Gonzalez was scheduled to testify later in the day. The 3 surviving members of Bravo team had become reluctant heroes, their faces appearing on news programs and in newspapers around the world as symbols of military integrity and constitutional loyalty. But fame and recognition couldn't bring back Corporal Kim or erase the trauma of that terrible day when their commanding officer revealed himself to be a traitor. David's funeral had been one of the hardest experiences of Sarah's life. His parents, immigrants from South Korea who had raised their son to love America and serve with honor, had thanked Sarah through their tears for ensuring that their son's sacrifice was not in vain. The congressional committee filed into the room, led by Chairman Patricia Morrison, a former military officer herself who understood the gravity of what had almost happened. The committee included members from both political parties, all of whom had been briefed on the classified details of the conspiracy and its implications for national security. Chairman Morrison called the session to order and addressed Sarah directly. Captain Chun, this committee wants to thank you and your team for your courage and quick thinking under extraordinary circumstances. Your actions prevented not just an assassination, but what could have been a successful coup attempt. We're here today to understand the full scope of what happened and to ensure that such a betrayal of trust never happens again. Sarah stood and took the oath to tell the truth, knowing that everything she said would be scrutinized by investigators, legal experts, and historians for years to come. The truth was complex and painful, but it needed to be told completely and accurately. Chairman Morrison, members of the committee, I want to begin by honoring the memory of Corporal David Kim, who died protecting the Constitution when he refused to participate in General Thompson's illegal orders. Everything that happened afterward was only possible because of his courage and sacrifice. She paused to collect herself, then continued with the detailed account she had given dozens of times over the past 3 months. But each time she told the story, new details emerged or connections became clearer as the investigation progressed. The committee members asked penetrating questions about the military culture that had allowed General Thompson to operate without detection for so long. Sarah was honest about the trust that soldiers placed in their commanding officers and how that trust could be exploited by someone with malicious intentions. Representative Johnson, Sarah replied to a specific question. The military operates on a foundation of trust and respect for the chain of command. We're trained to follow orders without question because in combat situations, hesitation or debate can get people killed. But that training assumes that our officers are acting within legal and constitutional boundaries. When someone like General Thompson abuses that trust, it creates a situation where good soldiers can be manipulated into doing terrible things. The investigation had revealed that General Thompson was not acting alone. He was part of a network of military officers, intelligence operatives, and civilian contractors who believed that the government had been compromised by foreign influences and that extreme action was necessary to save the country. Their beliefs were based on conspiracy theories and misinterpretations of political events, but they had convinced themselves that assassination and coup were acts of patriotism rather than treason. The funding for the operation had come from a shadowy organization called the American Heritage Foundation, which presented itself as a patriotic think tank, but was actually a front for wealthy individuals who wanted to use violence to change American politics. The foundation had been infiltrating military and intelligence communities for years, identifying individuals who might be susceptible to their radical ideology and gradually recruiting them into their conspiracy. Sarah testified about the sophisticated nature of the plot and the resources that had been devoted to its planning. The general had detailed intelligence about the government officials' schedules, security protocols, and personal habits. This information could only have come from multiple sources within the government and military. The conspiracy was much larger than just one misguided officer and his immediate associates. The committee members were particularly interested in how Bravo team had managed to recognize the illegal nature of the orders and resist them despite their training to obey superior officers. Sarah explained the role that military education and constitutional training had played in their decision-making process. Senator Williams, she said in response to a question from the committee's ranking minority member, every soldier swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't make exceptions for superior officers or claims of national emergency. When the general ordered us to assassinate American government officials, we knew immediately that those orders violated our oath and our legal obligations as soldiers. During a break in the testimony, Sarah was approached by FBI agent Foster, who had become a familiar figure during the investigation. Agent Foster had been leading the task force responsible for tracking down all members of the conspiracy and had developed a professional respect for Sarah's integrity and attention to detail. Captain, I wanted to update you on some recent developments. We've arrested 12 additional conspirators in the past week, including 2 sitting members of Congress and a retired CIA director. The American Heritage Foundation has been shut down, and its assets are being seized as evidence. This conspiracy was even more extensive than we initially realized. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and horror. Each new arrest proved that Bravo team's actions had prevented a much larger catastrophe than just the assassination of 3 government officials. The conspirators had been planning to use the assassinations as a justification for declaring martial law and suspending constitutional government. Agent Foster, what about General Thompson? How is he cooperating with the investigation? He's been completely uncooperative. He still insists that he was acting as a patriot and that the officials he planned to kill were traitors. He shows no remorse for Corporal Kim's murder or for the damage his actions caused to military morale and public trust. He'll face court-martial proceedings next month, and the prosecution is seeking the death penalty for treason and murder. When the testimony resumed, Sarah was asked about the broader implications of the conspiracy for military culture and civilian control of the armed forces. This was perhaps the most important part of her testimony, as it would influence future policies and training programs designed to prevent similar betrayals. Chairman Morrison, the most dangerous aspect of this conspiracy was how it exploited the genuine patriotism and dedication of military personnel. The conspirators wrapped their treason in the flag and claimed to be saving the country. They preyed on the fears and concerns that all soldiers have about threats to national security. Sarah paused to organize her thoughts before continuing. Moving forward, we need better education about the Constitution and the legal limits of military action. Soldiers need to understand that patriotism sometimes means refusing orders, especially when those orders violate the principles we've sworn to defend. We also need better systems for reporting suspected illegal activities within the chain of command. The committee spent considerable time discussing the psychological impact of the conspiracy on military personnel and the steps that would be needed to rebuild trust between soldiers and their commanders. Sarah's recommendations included enhanced background investigations for senior officers, regular constitutional training for all military personnel, and the establishment of independent channels for reporting suspected illegal activities. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader lessons of the experience. The conspiracy had failed not because of sophisticated security systems or intelligence gathering, but because individual soldiers had chosen to uphold their oaths and moral principles despite enormous pressure to comply with illegal orders. Corporal Kim's refusal to participate, even knowing it would cost him his life, had provided the moral clarity that the rest of the team needed to act decisively. Lieutenant Rodriguez's technical expertise had enabled them to sabotage the communications jamming and alert outside authorities. Sergeant Gonzalez's quick thinking had ensured that help was on the way even if their own efforts failed. And Sarah's marksmanship skills, developed over years of training and practice, had provided the precise application of force necessary to stop the general without escalating the situation into a larger firefight that might have resulted in more casualties. During the final session of testimony, Chairman Morrison asked Sarah about her future plans and whether the experience had changed her commitment to military service. Chairman Morrison, this experience has actually strengthened my commitment to serving my country. I've learned that the Constitution and the principles it represents are fragile and must be actively defended by every generation. I plan to continue my military career and to use my experience to help train the next generation of soldiers about their constitutional obligations. Sarah also spoke about the importance of honoring Corporal Kim's sacrifice by ensuring that the lessons of the conspiracy were not forgotten. She had worked with his family to establish a foundation that would provide constitutional education for military personnel and their families, funded by the proceeds from a book she was writing about the experience. David Kim died because he understood that some principles are worth dying for. He knew that the Constitution is more important than any individual officer or any claims of emergency or necessity. His courage in that briefing room saved our democracy, and we owe it to him to make sure that future soldiers understand the importance of that choice. As the hearing concluded, Sarah felt a sense of closure that had been missing since that terrible day 3 months ago. The truth had been told, the conspiracy had been exposed, and measures were being put in place to prevent similar betrayals in the future. But she also knew that the vigilance required to protect democracy would never end. There would always be people who believed that violence was justified to achieve their political goals, and there would always be a need for individuals willing to stand up to them regardless of the personal cost. Walking out of the FBI building that evening, Sarah looked up at the Capitol dome glowing in the distance and thought about all the soldiers who had died defending the principles it represented. Corporal Kim had joined their ranks, not on a foreign battlefield, but in a briefing room on an American military base, fighting against enemies who wore the same uniform he did. The general had betrayed their trust, but in the end, that betrayal had only made their commitment to the Constitution stronger. One shot from Sarah had finished the lesson that David Kim had begun with his life. That loyalty to country meant loyalty to principles, not to people, and that sometimes the greatest courage was required not in foreign wars but in defending democracy from its domestic enemies. The investigation would continue for months to come, and the legal proceedings would take years to resolve completely. But the most important victory had already been won in that courtyard when American soldiers chose the Constitution over conspiracy, duty over deception, and sacrifice over surrender. That lesson would resonate through military training and constitutional education for generations to come, ensuring that David Kim's sacrifice would protect American democracy long after the immediate crisis had passed.